I'm Caroline Whitaker, 27 years old, and technically I'm the older twin, 3 minutes ahead of my sister Madeline, though in our house you'd never know it. To most people, we were just two sisters from a neat Denver condo, raised by a mom who ran a marketing company from her phone, and a dad who coded from behind closed doors. But behind those modern windows and picture-perfect photos, there was a split so deep it might as well have been a canyon. By the time we were out of preschool, it was already clear which of us was the star and which one was simply there. I didn't need them to say it out loud. I could read it in every look, every shrug, every time they celebrated her and barely glanced at me. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to prove yourself in a family that didn't seem to notice you were there. Growing up in the Whitaker house meant learning early that love wasn't handed out evenly. I was the quiet one, the steady one, the one who figured things out without needing reminders. Madeline. She was bright, loud, photogenic, everything Mom wanted the world to see. Every holiday photo, every school event, every gift under the tree tilted in her direction. She got the sparkle shoes, the ballet classes, the phone upgrades, while I was handed whatever still worked. Even when I started showing signs of being good at coding building games off tutorials, creating little weather apps in middle school, I'd barely get a nod. Our mom, Julie, always said she believed in celebrating what shines. And to her, Madeline sparkled. She posted videos of Madeline's school plays with hashtags like #ProudMom, but when I won first place at the citywide science fair, the only thing that made it into her feed was a blurry shot of Madeline's new rehearsal outfit. Our dad Henry wasn't cruel, just absent in that quiet way that hurts more than yelling. I showed him an app once that I built from scratch, something I was proud of. He skimmed it, muttered, "That's nice," then asked Madeline how her auditions were going. We weren't rich, but we lived comfortably. Still, there was always a reason why something I asked for wasn't possible, even small things like a tech camp or a secondhand tablet. Yet those same weeks, Madeline would be unpacking new dance shoes from New York or prepping for a private acting coach. It wasn't about the money. It was about what they valued, and I was never on that list. What stung the most was the way they spun it. Whenever I brought up the imbalance even gently, Mom would smile and say, "Caroline, you're just so independent. You don't need the same kind of help." That line became the catch-all. You don't need a ride, a new laptop, a seat at the table. And slowly I started believing it. But something inside me started to shift after college graduation. Madeline and I both earned our degrees the same week, mine in computer science, hers in theater. I had secured a full scholarship to MIT for graduate research. Madeline had a few local auditions and no solid plans. So when Mom and Dad booked a 5-day trip to Miami to celebrate her graduation, 3 plane tickets, none. With my name, I stood in the kitchen holding my acceptance letter, watching Madeline pose in her beach outfit for Instagram, captioned "Family Time in Paradise." I didn't say anything. I just went back to my room, folded the letter in half, and slid it into my notebook. But that night I overheard my parents talking their voices low, but not soft enough. Mom said if we only had Madeline, life would be so much easier. And my dad, he didn't disagree. That was the moment, the line I couldn't unhear, and I knew then something had to change. After that night, after hearing those words float up the staircase, "If we only had Madeline," things started to make sense in a way they hadn't before. Not just the trip to Miami or the way my name was missing from the dinner reservations and the group photos. It was everything. The ballet slippers shipped from New York, the $1,000 summer theater camps, the endless applause over every small thing Madeline did while I was told to be quiet during dinner or reminded that I was so mature for not needing attention. I remembered once when we were both maybe 9 or 10, standing in the middle of a department store. Madeline had pointed to a sparkly lavender dress, something that shimmered under the lights, and before she finished her sentence, Mom had it draped over her arm. I found a plain navy sweatshirt on clearance, $5, a stitched hem, and when I held it up, Mom gave me a tight smile and said, "Put it back, honey. We're not made of money." Then she bought Madeline 2 more outfits and took her for frozen yogurt. That pattern played out again and again, just in different costumes. Madeline's ballet shoes got replaced twice a year, fitted by some boutique rep who drove down from Fort Collins. When I asked about a week-long coding workshop I'd seen on a school flyer, nothing fancy, just something about building mobile games, Mom didn't even look up from her phone. She just said, "Now's not a good time, Caroline." A week later, she posted a video of Madeline twirling across our living room floor with a caption that read, "Can't wait to see her on Broadway someday." By middle school, I'd stopped asking. I found a few old programming forums and used Dad's retired laptop, the one with the cracked corner, and a fan that whined like a mosquito when it got hot. I'd sit on the floor by my bed, earbuds, in rewinding YouTube videos about Python loops until I could write a basic calculator from scratch. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Dad worked from home just a few rooms down, but he may as well have been in another state. Once I showed him a simple game I built kind of like a block shooter, where you had to time your clicks just right. I waited behind him while he tapped through it, then without a word turned his chair and asked Madeline if she'd gotten the lead in the spring recital. He never brought the game up again. When we turned 12, Madeline got an iPhone in rose gold top of the line, the kind with all the fancy camera features. My birthday gift that year was a used flip phone in a taped-up box. Mom said it was perfect for emergencies, and I nodded. What else could I do? A few nights later, I saw a photo of Madeline's new phone on Instagram, sitting beside her smoothie, perfectly filtered with the caption, "Proud of my girl." There wasn't a single photo of me. In 7th grade, I joined the math club mostly because it felt like something I could do quietly. I spent hours working through problem sets at the library, hoping to qualify for regionals. When I finally did, I came home with my score sheet, my fingers still ink-smudged from the final round. I held it up standing in the kitchen and said, "Mom, I scored highest in my class." She glanced up from the sink, nodded, and before I could finish the sentence, Madeline walked in and started talking about a new solo she might get. That was the end of it. My score sheet sat on the counter for 2 days until I tucked it into my folder and forgot about it. Even school couldn't protect me from the comparison. 8th grade science fair, I spent 6 weeks building a small robot, just a rover with a claw that could pick up paper clips. I wired the motors myself, figured out the coding logic, and won first place in the county division. I came home proud, but as I walked through the front door, I heard Mom on speakerphone telling someone, "Madeline's theater director says she's a natural. She has that spark." My trophy sat in my backpack for 3 days before I unpacked it and put it in my closet. When high school came, Madeline joined the computer science club, not because she loved it, but because someone told her it looked good on college apps. She barely showed up to meetings, but Mom still paid for her to attend a tech camp in Palo Alto, a week-long program that cost more than I'd seen in my savings account. I showed Mom a folder with 3 finished apps I'd built from home. She didn't even flip through it. "You've got all the tools already," she said. "You don't need that camp to succeed." So I stayed up late every night that summer building an app that tracked local weather anomalies. By senior year, it got picked up by a small Denver tech blog. I showed Dad the article waiting for some kind of spark. He just said, "That's good. Your sister's coach says she might get a call back in LA. There was a day that sticks with me, the kind that you don't write down, but never forget. It was the fall of our junior year. Madeline got a whole new wardrobe for back to school, a stack of jeans with tags still on sweaters that came folded in tissue paper. I opened my envelope and found a gift card to a thrift store downtown. $20. No note. When I brought it up later, Mom said, "We're budgeting this year." But that night, her Instagram showed Madeline spinning in front of our mirror in a new cashmere hoodie captioned, "My Fashionista." I stopped looking at her posts after that. I stopped checking for my name, but I kept building. I worked on a machine learning project for my AP statistics class and entered it into a state competition. It won. There was even a write-up in the Denver Post's education column. I invited my parents to the ceremony, rented, a dress, curled my hair, rehearsed my speech. But that night, Madeline had a showcase performance for a local theater troupe, and Mom said it'd be too hard to split the evening. They went to her show. I took a rideshare to the ceremony, shook hands with the sponsor, and smiled for a photo I never received. I didn't say anything on the way home. But a few weeks later, I saw a flyer for a National Youth Coding Summit. It was a long-shot $500 to register, and spots were limited. I brought it to Mom and waited while she scrolled through her email. Not in the budget, she said without looking up. The next morning, she hired a private acting coach for Madeline. $1,000 for 8 lessons. I stood in the kitchen with that crumpled flyer in my fist, and something shifted. Not loud, not angry, just final. And when senior year started, the pattern wasn't just a pattern anymore. It was a wall. Madeline had her own rehearsal space in the den. I had dishes, laundry, errands. I'd come home from school and head straight to the sink while she practiced monologues in the living room. One night I dropped a spoon and Mom snapped, "Keep it quiet, Caroline. She needs to focus." I stared at the water swirling down the drain and realized my time, my voice even didn't matter here. That was the night I started keeping track. A notebook tucked under my mattress where I wrote down every missed ceremony, every chore, every comment, and by the time spring rolled around, that notebook was full. Senior year brought a different kind of routine. By then, most of Madeline's life revolved around rehearsals, school plays, community theater auditions, weekends packed with acting workshops. The rest of the household shifted to support that. Mom printed a new calendar and hung it in the kitchen rehearsals, marked in blue auditions, in red and chore assignments, written in plain black pen. Most of those black lines had my name beside them. After school, I'd drop my backpack in the hallway and head straight to the kitchen sink or laundry room. Dishes, meal prep, grocery runs. If Madeline needed quiet, I was expected to tiptoe. If she forgot her water bottle at rehearsal, I was the one who drove across town to deliver it. One night, I was folding laundry on the couch when I heard Mom in the other room telling Dad, "We need to protect her time. This could be her shot." That same week, she handed me a list with 7 items clean, the bathrooms changed the bed sheets, organized the hall closet, and added, "If we all pitch in, she'll have space to focus." But the "we" was just me. One evening, while Madeline rehearsed her lines under Mom's direction, I was scrubbing a burnt pot in the sink. The metal clanged lightly as I rinsed it, and Mom called out sharply from the living room, "Caroline, can you keep it down?" "She's working." I said nothing, just finished what I was doing and dried my hands. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I came downstairs quietly for water and paused halfway down the steps when I heard voices. Mom and Dad were in the living room, their words hushed but clear enough in the silence of the house. "If we only had Madeline." Mom said, her tone tired. Things would be simpler. There was a pause. Then Dad replied, "Caroline's strong. She always figures things out." I didn't move. I just stood there, one hand on the railing, the other pressed to my chest. After a few moments, I turned back to my room and sat at my desk with the notebook I kept hidden behind a row of textbooks. I wrote down the date, then those exact words. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just recorded them. By the time morning came, I had filled 4 more pages. Every time I packed Madeline's lunch before rehearsal. Every time my name was left off a family plan. Every time they called me independent like it meant I didn't count. That week at school, Mr. Conrad pulled me aside after coding club and asked if I'd considered applying for the National AI Challenge. He said my last app, the transit project I'd built, had serious potential. I thanked him, took the paperwork, and kept it to myself. At home, the mood was all about Madeline's latest role. She had landed a spot in a spring production directed by someone who had worked in New York. Mom was thrilled. She turned the living room into a practice space and cleared the family schedule so Madeline could rehearse every night without distraction. One Saturday afternoon, while I was grocery shopping with a list that included almond milk stage makeup wipes and a specific brand of throat lozenges Madeline preferred, I checked my phone and saw an email from the AI program. I'd made the finalist round. They wanted a video presentation by the end of the month. When I brought it up at dinner just briefly, Mom didn't even put her fork down. "That's nice," she said, eyes on her plate. Then she turned to Madeline and asked how rehearsals were going. Madeline lit up, describing the costume fittings, the lighting choices, and how the director said she had a real spark. I finished my meal in silence and cleared the dishes without being asked. A few days later, while collecting laundry from Madeline's room, I found a handwritten note stuck to her mirror. I wasn't trying to read it, it just caught my eye. In Mom's handwriting, "You were born to shine. Don't let anyone dim it." There was never a note like that for me. No pep talks, no quiet encouragement, just expectations, just silence. At school, Mr. Conrad nominated me for a district award and said he'd be writing a letter of recommendation for MIT. He asked if my parents would be attending the ceremony. I told him I didn't know. I didn't bother asking them. That weekend, I spent 2 full days revising my AI project and recording the video presentation on a borrowed camera from the library. I edited it on my old laptop, careful not to crash the system, and submitted it before midnight on Sunday. Mom and Dad never asked what I was working on. They were out that night at Madeline's dress rehearsal. A week later, we got word that Madeline had been invited to perform at a regional showcase. There was talk of flights, a group hotel rate, maybe even sponsorships from the local arts council. I found out the same day that I'd won the AI competition a scholarship and a research internship. I printed the letter and left it on the kitchen table. No one said a word. That night, I sat on my bed and flipped through my notebook, the one I'd started in silence, now thick with paper and scribbled margins. It was filled with dates, overheard comments, and a kind of ledger that no one else could see. And somewhere between the lists and the memories, I started to understand what I had to do next. It was after midnight when I found myself sitting at my mother's desk, the glow of her laptop casting light across stacks of rehearsal schedules and receipts for Madeline's acting lessons. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just trying to make sense of it all. Her inbox was cluttered, mostly client emails and performance updates, nothing personal. But tucked inside a folder labeled private, there was a short email thread that stopped me cold. The sender's name was Susan Halbrook. I'd heard the name once before in passing. A quiet moment at a family gathering when Mom mentioned her sister and then quickly changed the subject. But the message was still there, dated years ago. Susan had written Julie, "You're blind to the way you treat Caroline. It's not just favoritism, it's hurtful." Mom's response was only one line. "Stay out of it, Susan. You don't understand this family." That was it. No follow-up, no apology, just silence. But seeing my name in that message, reading it from someone who had noticed, it cracked something open. At the bottom of Susan's signature was an old address in Boulder. I scribbled it into the back of my notebook, folded the page, and closed the laptop without making a sound. 2 days later, I told Mom I had a school library project that would take most of Saturday. She nodded without asking questions. She was busy packing snacks and costume bags for Madeline's regional showcase. That morning, I walked 3 blocks to the bus stop with a printout of the route folded in my jacket. It was a little over an hour to Boulder. The ride was quiet, the windows fogged slightly from the cold. I kept my hand on the folded scrap of paper the entire way. The address led me to a modest house on a tree-lined street just past the university. The porch was small, the yard neat but not fussy. A wind chime moved gently in the breeze. I stood there for a full minute before knocking. When the door opened, a woman in her late 30s looked at me for a moment, then tilted her head. "You're Caroline, aren't you?" I nodded. "I was hoping one day you'd come." She stepped back to let me in. The house smelled like fresh coffee and something faintly floral. Bookshelves lined the living room, programming manuals, sci-fi paperbacks, notebooks stacked neatly by subject. On the dining table, a laptop was open beside a half-eaten bagel and a notepad filled with code. Susan wore jeans and a navy sweater. Her brown hair was short, her eyes steady. She poured me a mug of tea without asking and motioned for me to sit. We didn't start with the hard questions. She asked me about school, what I liked to build, how I got into coding. I told her everything, how it started with YouTube videos and my dad's old laptop, how I'd taught myself Python and built apps in the dark after dishes were done. She listened like none of it surprised her. When I told her about Madeline, about the scholarships, no one mentioned the chores, the silence. She didn't interrupt. She just folded her hands on the table and let me speak. "She's always needed to be the center of things," Susan said quietly. "Your mother, I mean. When we were kids, it was the same way. I got tired of fighting it." She told me she worked as a freelance software developer for a handful of startups, mostly clean energy and transportation systems. She lived alone, kept her routine simple, and coded most nights until the screen blurred. "You've got something rare," she said, after looking through one of my app builds on her tablet. "Not just skill, but instinct. You solve problems that matter." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever looked at my work like that. After lunch, we moved to her home office, a sunlit spare room with dual monitors, shelves of hardware parts, and a whiteboard covered in graphs. She showed me how to structure machine learning data for city energy usage. I took notes so fast I barely looked up. By the end of the afternoon, she handed me a small metal key fob with a white logo stamped into it. "It's outside," she said. I followed her to the driveway where a white Tesla Model 3 sat parked under a carport. She held out the fob again. "I've done well the past few years," she said, "and I wanted you to have a way forward that doesn't require asking anyone's permission." I stood there without moving. "It's not about the car," she added. "It's about knowing that someone sees you, really sees you." We didn't hug, not yet, but something settled quietly in my chest. I kept the Tesla parked at her house. I wasn't ready to bring it home. I started coming to Boulder every other weekend, spending long afternoons debugging code learning advanced frameworks, sketching ideas for a new AI tool focused on sustainable transit systems. During the week, I worked a part-time job at the campus tech library, organizing books, leading coding tutorials for younger students. The pay was small, but it gave me structure and space. The AI project Susan helped me refine eventually caught the attention of a national scholarship program. I submitted my prototype, a predictive model for improving energy use in public buildings, and waited. A few weeks later, I received a thick envelope in the mail. I opened it in the back corner of the library, sitting cross-legged on the floor. $20,000, plus an invitation to join a summer research cohort in Boston. I took the letter home and slid it across the dinner table while Mom scrolled through her phone. She glanced at the header, then asked Madeline how rehearsal had gone. Dad nodded once, then went back to reading something on his tablet. I folded the letter and placed it back in my folder. No one mentioned it again. Susan did. She called the next night and asked how I planned to celebrate. I told her I'd probably just finish my calculus homework and go to bed early. "Well," she said, "I mailed you something. It should arrive tomorrow. Open it alone." The next afternoon, a package arrived with a coffee subscription, a pair of noise-canceling headphones, and a note that said, "Keep building. You're more than enough." I pinned the note inside my closet where no one else could see. Senior year moved quickly after that, filled with long nights at the tech library, weekends in Boulder, and every spare moment spent refining the AI model Susan and I had built from scratch. We were using real data sets now, optimizing city transit routes for energy efficiency testing, edge cases, and building a full dashboard interface. She walked me through each step, then stepped back to let me lead. At school, Mr. Conrad nominated me for a National STEM Award. I didn't tell my parents. I just showed up the night of the ceremony, accepted the plaque, and walked home alone. The next morning, I placed the certificate on the kitchen counter before heading to class. When I got back, it was gone. Not mentioned, not framed, just gone. Madeline's schedule, meanwhile, had taken over the house. New headshots, voice training, private coaching from a former Broadway actress. My parents rearranged the living room to create a taping space for her auditions. A full-length mirror leaned against the wall where the bookshelf used to be. My dad strung up better lighting, so her reels looked more professional. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with headphones on tweaking code on my laptop while Mom scrolled through rehearsal notes beside me. I got an email confirming that my AI project had been selected for a regional tech competition with an automatic invitation to MIT's Summer Innovation Lab. I stared at the message for a while before clicking reply. I didn't tell anyone at home. Instead, I packed my laptop and rode the bus to Boulder. Susan was in her office debugging a logistics script when I arrived. I held out my phone and she read the email twice. Then she looked at me and said, "You're ready." That evening, she showed me how to prep a video pitch for the panel. We outlined the project in stages: input, data optimization, logic, UI features, and recorded 2 rounds of practice runs. I wore the same navy button-down I used for library shifts. No makeup, no background music, just clean, steady work. A week later, the competition streamed live online. I sat in the corner of Susan's living room watching the judges discuss our app on camera. One of them said it was the most practical solution they'd seen all day. I got the email just after midnight. First place. The prize included a full scholarship to MIT tuition housing and a position on the campus research team. I printed the offer letter and kept it tucked in the front pocket of my school folder. The next morning, I handed it to my mother while she was prepping Madeline's lunch. She glanced at the heading and said, "That's nice." Caroline then turned to ask Madeline if she'd remembered to pack her script. My father nodded absently from across the room. I left the letter on the counter and went upstairs. At school, Mr. Conrad congratulated me in front of the class. A few classmates clapped. I smiled, said thank you, and kept working. That Friday, I stayed late after school to help organize a community coding event. We set up laptops in the gym and invited local middle schoolers to try basic logic games. I led a group through a lesson on creating loops and conditionals. One girl stayed after and asked if I'd built any apps myself. I pulled up the transit model and let her try a simulation. Her eyes lit up when the data adjusted in real time. Susan picked me up that night in her hatchback. She'd brought me a folder of MIT housing forms and a box of protein bars for finals week. "They won't see it until they have to," she said quietly. We didn't talk much on the drive home, but I kept thinking about that moment in the gym, the way the girl looked when the code responded to her input. I hadn't felt that in a long time, not at home, not in school. Just that spark of doing something that mattered. 2 days later, I received a formal press release from the regional STEM board highlighting winners from across the state. My name was listed first. I forwarded the email to my parents' shared account. It was the only time I sent something directly. No one replied. That weekend, my dad drove Madeline to a casting call 2 counties over. Mom posted a photo of them in the car captioned, "Supporting our girls' dreams every mile of the way." I watched the post go up, then closed the app and opened my MIT housing portal. I picked the quietest dorm on the list. One night, Susan called to say she'd made arrangements to drive behind me to Boston, just in case anything happened along the way. I told her I'd be fine. "I know," she said, "but you shouldn't have to do it alone." I packed slowly over the next few weeks. I boxed up my notebooks, backed up my files, and folded the navy button-down carefully into my suitcase. On my last day at the tech library, they gave me a card signed by the other assistants. Elena, one of the interns, wrote, "Don't forget us when you're running the world." I smiled and put the card in my backpack. Home stayed quiet. My parents never mentioned the move. Madeline talked about her next audition and asked if I'd be around to help run lines that weekend. "I leave Sunday," I said. She blinked, then nodded slowly. The next morning, I loaded the Tesla at Susan's house, checked the tire pressure twice, and programmed the route to Cambridge. I had playlists cued, snacks packed, and a folder of documents in the glove box. Susan pulled up behind me at the last minute holding a small paper bag. "Open it later," she said. I hugged her once tight and fast and got in the car. The engine was silent as I pulled away from the curb, the sky still pale from morning light. I didn't look back. I pulled into the driveway that Sunday evening just as the sun dipped behind the neighbor's roofline. The house looked the same porch light, same leaning mailbox, but I felt different stepping out of the driver's seat. The Tesla's quiet engine had barely made a sound, but the presence of it was loud. I didn't park on the street. I parked right in front, like I belonged there. My parents had just returned from another out-of-state showcase with Madeline. Their SUV sat next to mine, dusty from the road, with theater bags and a cooler still in the trunk. I opened the front door before they could notice me outside. They came in laughing, tanned, tired arms, full of souvenirs and leftover catering. Madeline had on a flowing sundress and platform sandals, already talking about callbacks. When Mom finally looked up and saw the Tesla through the front window, she stopped cold. "Whose car is that?" she asked, her tone low but sharp. I held up the key fob. "Mine," I said. "It was a graduation gift. From Aunt Susan." The silence in the room hit hard. Mom's face didn't move, but her hand tightened around the strap of her purse. Dad blinked slowly, then looked back at the car. Madeline scoffed loud enough for it to register. "A Tesla." From her mom stepped closer. "Susan gave you a car." $40,000? Are you serious? I nodded. She believes in my work. Before I could finish the sentence, Mom pulled out her phone and dialed on speaker. The ringtone echoed through the room until Susan picked up. "Julie," she answered, calm and even. "That car is too much," Mom snapped. "This is over the line." Susan didn't raise her voice. "No, it's not. I gave it to someone who earned it." Dad cleared his throat, then finally spoke. "Caroline, be reasonable. Madeline could use that car for auditions, travel, real things. It's only fair." I looked at him. "I'm keeping it," I said. "Steady. I don't need anyone to co-sign that." Mom's eyes narrowed. "You're being selfish. We're a family. You should be helping Madeline, not showing her up." I reached into my bag, pulled out a white envelope, and placed it on the table. "This is my MIT scholarship offer," I said. "Full ride, tuition, housing, research placement. I leave in 4 days." Dad stared at the letter. Mom didn't move. Madeline's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then I pulled out my phone and tapped to open a post I'd written the night before. The caption was simple, but the words beneath it were years in the making. I had detailed everything, how I'd earned every scholarship, every competition I'd entered alone, the endless chores, the silence, the neglect. How Susan saw me long before anyone else did. "I posted it," I said. "You might want to check your feeds." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The post went up 5 minutes earlier. By the time I stepped away from the table, comments were already coming in. Teachers, classmates, even former neighbors were chiming in. Mr. Conrad had shared it publicly, calling me one of the most gifted students he'd ever taught. One of Mom's old co-workers commented, "Julie, this is heartbreaking. I hope it's not true." Mom's phone buzzed then again. She read one message, then locked the screen and sat down. "Caroline," she said, quieter now, "how could you humiliate us like this?" I didn't answer. Dad looked up from the paper. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought Madeline needed more support." I picked up my bag. "You didn't think about me at all." Madeline stepped in, then her voice brittle. "So what you're leaving now, you think you're better than us because you're going to MIT?" I looked at her. "No," I said. "I just don't need you to see me anymore." I walked out the front door without another word. The house stood behind me, small and still. Their luggage was still in the car. I opened the driver's side door and slid into the Tesla. The seat felt familiar now. Mine. Susan was waiting a few blocks away in her car. We didn't say anything when I pulled up behind her, just nodded once. We drove out of Denver together, her taillights steady ahead of me, mile after mile. Each turn of the wheel took me farther from the hallway where I used to code in silence, from the kitchen where my accomplishments were never mentioned, from the calendar on the wall that never had my name on it. Ahead of me was Boston, MIT, a dorm room with my name on the roster, a campus that had chosen me. And behind me, a family still staring at a screen, wondering how the quiet one finally spoke loud enough for the world to hear. Boston in late August was humid and loud, with a kind of restless energy I hadn't felt before. MIT's campus stretched in clean lines and concrete quads, students dragging duffels across sidewalks, moving carts, creaking down stairwells. I found my dorm, checked in, and carried my boxes up 2 flights. The room was small, just a desk, a single bed, and a shelf bolted to the wall, but it was mine. I unpacked slowly, hanging my MIT letter beside the window setting, Susan's handwritten note beside it. The Tesla key stayed in my drawer. I didn't need to show it off here. Orientation came fast, meetings with professors, coding challenges, project groups forming overnight. On the second day, I met Elena Brooks, a second year from Seattle, with sharp eyes and a quiet laugh. We were both assigned to the same machine learning lab and ended up sitting next to each other during a Python review. By the end of the week, we were swapping ideas over coffee and splitting takeout boxes on the dorm floor. One night, I showed her a working version of my energy optimization app. She ran a quick test case on her laptop and raised her eyebrows. "You're kind of a rock star," she said. I smiled, then closed the laptop. Just someone who had a lot of time to figure things out. We fell into a rhythm classes by day, lab work by night, late walks through campus when our heads got too full of data. Sometimes we'd sit on the dorm roof and watch the skyline shimmer across the river, not saying much. It felt different from home. There wasn't anyone to impress, no one watching. Just space. Back in Denver, the LinkedIn post had taken on a life of its own. Thousands of views, hundreds of comments. Most were supportive teachers, former classmates, even a few of Mom's old clients. Mr. Conrad had posted a message of his own sharing memories from class and writing. Caroline was always ahead of her time. Her work speaks for itself. Elena saw the post one night and kept reading aloud some of the replies, half in disbelief. "Your mom's getting dragged," she said quietly. Hard. I didn't reply, just nodded and kept typing. A few weeks into the semester, I got a text from Mom. It came in during a study group session. I didn't open it right away. When I did, it just said, "Can we talk? I'm sorry. We didn't see how much we hurt you." I let it sit. There were no follow-ups, no voicemails, just one text floating in the silence. I showed it to Susan that weekend during our usual call. She listened, then said, "It's up to you." I didn't block the number. I didn't respond either. Instead, I focused on the work. The startup that partnered with our lab offered me a part-time position coding sustainability models for public infrastructure. It paid enough to cover meals and books. I walked across campus every morning with a worn backpack and a flash drive clipped to my belt. Elena and I entered a hackathon that fall, an overnight sprint challenge with 40 teams and only one prize. We built a live traffic analytics tool and pitched it at sunrise in front of 5 exhausted judges. We won $5,000 and a meeting with an investor. We spent the next week drawing up mock-ups on cafe napkins and sketching long-term feature lists on the whiteboard in our dorm lounge. Susan called after the news broke. "You're killing it," she said. "I always knew you would." That night she mailed me a box of dark roast coffee, a stack of tech journals, and a note that read, "Keep building. You don't need permission to shine." I pinned it next to the scholarship letter. 2 months later, Mom texted again. This time it read, "Tiffany's struggling. She's overwhelmed. Could you talk to her? She looks up to you more than she admits." I sat with that message for a long time. Read it twice, then turned the screen off. I didn't answer. It wasn't anger, just clarity. I walked to the student center, bought a muffin, and spent the afternoon writing new logic pathways for the transit app. That night, Elena and I grabbed late-night fries and scribbled out our spring roadmap under the flicker of a diner sign. When we got back to the dorm, she turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about going back?" I looked at her and shook my head. I'm already where I belong. Winter settled in early that year. The trees outside my dorm turned bare and sharp, and the wind off the Charles River made everything feel a little quieter. My days were full classes meetings with our startup mentor, coffee runs with Elena, long nights of code that blurred into sunrise. But even with the pace, I felt steady, like I'd found my rhythm. Susan called every Sunday, usually in the evening. Sometimes we didn't talk about much, just quick updates and whatever show she was watching in the background. But every call ended the same way: keep going. You're doing just fine. I started saving her messages in a folder just in case. Back home, the noise around the post faded slowly. Comments slowed. Shares dropped off. But the shift stayed. I heard from one of my old science teachers who had never spoken up before. He wrote, "I wish I'd said something when I saw it. I see it now." Mom didn't write again after that last message. Neither did Dad. The silence wasn't cruel. It was just distance. Something that had always been there but now had a name. Madeline posted less after that fall. I saw a photo once, months later, of her holding a script in a small theater. No caption, just her looking tired. I didn't like it. I didn't say anything. But I remembered. Elena and I kept building. By spring, our app had passed 50,000 downloads. We'd signed a letter of intent with a city pilot program, and the startup offered me a leadership role after graduation. I said yes. I moved into a small apartment off campus that summer. Nothing fancy, just clean light, a secondhand couch, and a desk by the window. I framed 2 things on the wall above it: the scholarship letter and Susan's note. "You don't need permission to shine." That September, I flew her out for a conference. She wore sneakers and a black blazer and sat in the front row while I gave a talk on energy data transparency. Afterwards, she hugged me once and said, "You're not in anyone's shadow now." I knew she was right. Sometimes I thought about that notebook I kept under my bed back in Denver, the one where I wrote down every quiet hurt, every dish, every dismissal. I never brought it with me. I didn't need it anymore. I remembered it all, but I didn't live inside it. I didn't need to be seen by them to know I was real. I'd found that in Susan, in Elena, in every line of code that made something better. Family, I learned, isn't always who you start with. It's who sees you, shows up, and stays. If you've ever been the quiet one, the afterthought, the one they assumed would never leave, know this: you don't have to stay where you're not seen. You don't have to fight for space that was never offered. You can walk forward slowly, steadily, and find people who meet you where you are. And when you do, you'll understand something no spotlight can teach: that being chosen isn't as powerful as choosing yourself. Thanks for listening to my story. If any part of it sounded familiar to your own life, feel free to share in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. And if you're building something of your own, I hope you never stop.